This biennial edition was developed in the context of the 400 years anniversary of the city of Gothenburg, a harbor city, and is titled The Ghost Ship and the Sea Change. The biennial edition is curated by Lisa Rosendahl, who partnered with us for a 3 years period and even curated the biennial edition in 2019. The biennial connects to the historical layers of the city, both through site-specific research, but also through the artworks that we're presenting on the different sites here in Gothenburg. And we're trying to ask how different ways of narrating the past might affect our future and our present. And for doing that, we chose today rather anonymous place in the city of Gothenburg, Franska Tomten, in translation, the French plot of land, currently officially named Pakhusplatsen, as the narrative point of departure for the biennial. And we proposed that the story of this plot of land stands witness for the subjectivity of the history here and elsewhere. Franska Tomten, the place that you're seeing here on Google Maps, was the subject of a trade deal between Sweden and the French Empire in 1784. The French received then free trading benefits in the port of Gothenburg and had storage facilities in this area in the city. And in exchange, Sweden received authority over the island of Saint Bartholomew in the Caribbean. Saint Bartholomew was Sweden's longest-term colony for almost 100 years and was administrated as a free trade zone, where trade of enslaved people was legal until 1847. This edition of the biennial asks how might it change the way we think about Gothenburg if we look at the city from the perspective of this particular plot of land and its colonial history. Through artistic responses, the biennial traces this plot of land outwardly from Gothenburg Harbor to where it meets other places, voices and histories, suggesting that the city founded on transnational relationships can only become legible by looking at other places as well. For this edition of the biennial, artist Ayesha Hameed developed a new work, 2 ships, a mixed media installation currently installed at Rödasten Konsthall, main venue for the biennial, where I'm also here tonight. And the installation is installed at the top floor of the Konsthall. And I must admit that the images don't actually do justice to the installation, since it also includes a soundscape installation and meets the visitors with an olfactive experience. And I'll tell you just a few words about the work before I also introduce our other guests tonight in Mangalanayagam. The installation references the twin city plans and canal systems of Gothenburg and Batavia, both built by Dutch city planners in the 1620s, and the 1852 hurricane that struck Saint Bartholomew during colonial Swedish rule. In the work, the colonial trading histories of the 3 places are interwoven by evoking the winds moving through them, carrying ships, slaves, seeds, and storms. The soundscape references 2 historical trade ships that were deployed by Scandinavian East and West India companies, caught in storms and shipwrecked outside Gothenburg. The textiles, whose color and scent will fade with time, are printed with pigments from plants and spices used in as colonial commodities. In her work, Ayesha Hameed explores the heritage of Black diasporas through the figure of the Atlantic Ocean. And for the program today, Ayesha has specially recorded the performance work Black Atlantis, Retrograde Futurism, to fit the online format we are meeting in, and Ayesha will tell you just a few words about it in a few moments. Our collaboration with Ayesha started actually in 2019 when an existing work, a sound work, a transatlantic periodic table, was presented online as part of the biennial in 2019 and was symbolically placed by the city waterfront at Franska Tomten. Our collaboration continued then in 2020 in the framework of a speculative project responding to the idea of a monument in Gothenburg at Franska Tomten And the project was developed together with the Public Arts Agency Sweden, and is still possible to consult online at possiblemonuments.se that I took a screenshot from. So please do so after the talk if you're curious to meet both Ayesha's proposal and response to our invite, but also 8 other artistic reflections on the idea of a monument there. And in 2021, Ayesha was actually one of the artists in residence of Jaspis Konstnärsnämnden. And due to mobility limitations caused by the pandemic, the residency was a remote one. And it was in this context, reflecting on the different formats that artist residencies took this and last year, that we proposed to use the frame of a public program to put in conversation two artists, one in Gothenburg and one elsewhere, whose practices and interests easily find common ground: Ayesha Hameed and Nina Mangalanayagam. And the program today is presented in collaboration with the Embassy of Canada in Sweden and Jaspis Konstnärsnämnden, who I would like to also take the chance to thank. And I would also like to introduce Nina Mangalanayagam, is an artist currently based in Gothenburg, whose works were recently presented as part of the Boros biannual Deep Listening for Longing, curated by Ulrika Flink and Damanpreet Sandhu, and Comforting the Machine, a group exhibition ongoing just until last week here in Gothenburg, curated by Tavanda Apia and Simona Dumitriou. And for Boros biannual, and you see some installation shots from this presentation here, Nina presented a series of large-scale photographic prints in public spaces in 3 cities. And her research analyzing the shifting points of identification she experiences as a mixed heritage subject to explore the dichotomy of black and white notions of identity. In her research and practice, she is interested in the speculative narration of the past and hybridity, and has worked with the story and history of Franska Tomten, and specifically Saint Barts, for several years now. Nina Mangalanayagam is also lecturer at HDK Valand Academy of Arts here in Gothenburg. And I would like to welcome Nina and Ayesha. I look forward to your conversation, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And the screening of the video recorded performance Black Atlantis Retrograde Futurism will follow in just a few seconds. And starting 1850, we will meet Ayesha and Nina in conversation. And given the format of this digital space, I would also like to ask you, for best experience of the recorded performance, to please switch off your cameras and your microphones until the conversation opens for questions a bit after 7 o'clock. And we would like to encourage you to send us questions in the chat. Both I and my colleague Yuing Hu are here and can answer your questions regarding technical issues, but also if you have any questions that you would like the participants, Nina and Ayesha, to receive even before their conversation. So please do contact us if there's anything you would like to receive help with or wonder about. And I was also wondering, Ayesha, if you would like to give us just a bit of background about the performance work that is otherwise presented in another format before we actually screen it.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So Black Atlantis Retrograde Futurism is the 5th chapter of an ongoing project called Black Atlantis that's looking at the intertwined histories of transatlantic slavery with contemporary illegalized migration, and connecting it to oceanic climate change, or the oceanic Anthropocene. Retrograde Futurism was developed in this format that I call PowerPoint cinema, which is I basically take a PowerPoint and soup it up. I just add so much material to it and try to create a cinematic experience, while very consciously being constrained by the kind of crappy format of PowerPoint. So there's a kind of feeling of immersion and also disjunction. I performed this quite a bit a few years ago, but stopped because it was kind of quite a difficult story to tell. And I'm actually very grateful to Ioana for inviting me to record it, because I actually don't really think it can be a video, because there's something about the story that I think it wouldn't do justice to the story if it was told too smoothly. So what you're going to see is actually a live recording in one sitting of the performance that I did, with all the attendant errors and poor sound quality and all the glitches that attend to it. So thank you so much for coming.
It's a heavy work to watch, but each time when I'm watching it, I'm noticing more layers, and there are so many things that you could talk about in and how you've made this work and what you're referencing in the work. And I think it might be interesting to start working or talking about some of the strategies that you're using to talk about something that's very difficult to talk about, and thinking about, you know, the things that are unspeakable or the things that are unimaginable. And you mentioned in the beginning that your way of having this as a kind of a semi-live PowerPoint presentation rather than a film does more justice to the topic than actually doing a film recording of it. And I thought it could be quite interesting hearing you speak a little bit more about that in terms of having strategies of being able to talk about difficult subjects or tragedies or traumas, and how to go about that.
Sure. Thank you. Well, where can I start with that? Well, first of all, like there's a few things. So most of the work I've done for this Black Atlantis project have been in the form of what I call audiovisual essays. So I don't really think of these as artworks, but really studies that require sound and image. And I did that with the project as a whole because the kind of leaps that were needed to make the connection to climate, between climate change and transatlantic slavery and Mediterranean migrations, were just kind of like, you couldn't write about. I didn't think I could write about it in a linear way or talk about it. So that's just been a strategy for me for a long time. It's just to sort of work through a kind of bricolage, and I guess thinking that you bring things together and then there's the meaning or the feeling or the sense is sort of in the cracks between, and that I leave that for the person seeing it to do that. And they can take it in different ways. With this story, some of the pieces I've done for Black Atlantis are a little bit more lighthearted. They have more music in them. Some of them are about my own experience of, say, traveling to the Caribbean to former plantations, for example, and then I write myself in. But this one, I just was like, there's very little of me in it, so it was really important for me to be there to tell the story, because it's quite an exhausting story to tell and to kind of hold it. But I think for me, there's something like it's so on the nose that like these migrants who were trying to get to Europe their boat ended up following these currents that took slave ships across. And I think that I had a real suspicion of that being too tidy a story. And also thinking about how if the people who if the weather hadn't played this part in sort of creating this strange kind of living death kind of amalgamation, like I just felt like I needed to unpack it, but I didn't. There's a way in which I think if you work theoretically with certain kind of tragic histories, there's a kind of like, oh, cool, and how I can name this. And I just really didn't want to do that. I mean, it's very hard to do that. So I think for me, sort of getting like with the story, I'm trying to get at it from a lot of different angles and perspectives, and none of them very directly. Like some of these things that I bring into it, like Neil Balufa's film or Judith Clark's photographs, are things that I found out about when I was in Dakar, and to me, because it formed an ecology or a constellation with the other things, like I just like, okay, that needs to be there, even though if you ask me why, I can't really explain it, but I just felt like to get at something, to get at it too directly would be to kind of lose the kind of force of what had happened, I guess, in a way. And it was a way to sort of keep a kind of sense of responsibility. I think my presence in it like made me feel, because it's very hard to, I mean, even now I just sat here and watched it, and I recorded this about 6 times, and it's, I was tempted to leave the room, but I just have to stay with it, in a way.
But I think that's something really interesting, because I think the fact that you're staying with it also makes your audience stay with it. It's like you're kind of, you're going through this together, you're kind of staying with the trouble, in a kind of Donna Haraway sense. And I think that makes a real difference, because there's a certain pace to it, and because it's difficult, and because it's not a film screening, you can't kind of, you can't walk out of it if it's difficult. You kind of have to feel uncomfortable and try to pick these pieces together with you, which I think is really, really powerful. I watched I watched the performance. I watched a few things of you online yesterday, but there was one thing where I think it was at Goldsmiths, and you were talking about how you showed a music piece, or you played a music piece, but you did it in this kind of setting, and you were talking about how in the past you shown it, but you felt uncomfortable doing the whole music piece, and then you recognized that actually it needed to be the whole music piece, and you needed to stand there together with the audience and listen to music in a different way. And I think there's something in that as well, like kind of that you experiencing it together with the person who's kind of performing the lecture, that I think is, yeah, really powerful.
Well, I think the question really is like, it comes to the heart of like, how do you locate yourself in histories, how do you talk, like, how do you locate yourself without making about yourself? And I think you do that in your own work as well. Your video installation on your family's history in Jaffna, for example, it's like, in a way, the best, and I guess you used a kind of different strategy, which is to stay very close to your experience, rather than trying to tell this broad, sweeping history, right?
And I guess in a way I was thinking along similar lines of combining different materials, even though it was all shot in a very close proximity to me, and showing them at the same time from different perspectives, and then having a voiceover that retold narratives that were all fragmented in a way, coming from different times in my life, combining it into just one, and coming to terms with history in a personal family that partly involves a conflict that I haven't been involved in, but that my family has been, and then how you kind of reconnect within a family, not sharing the same trauma, having different experiences within that same family. So I think I was not working in the same way as you, but still thinking about how do we work with bricolage to kind of, to not try and tell the story, not try to kind of, now I'm going to explain what it's like for the viewer to understand the position, but to actually position myself and try to think from that position, what am I lacking, and what are the mistakes I'm making in this position. I think when we spoke the other day, we spoke about how we had similar experiences in our undergraduate educations, and maybe took different directions from it, but where my teacher, I wanted to take self-portraits, and my teacher told me, if if you want to take self-portraits, you need to understand what your image means. You're A woman, B, Asian, and that led me to actually delve deeper into the image of myself, or the kind of try to destroy that image or try to reconstruct it, and have worked just with myself and my own family to kind of negotiate those questions. But you said that yeah, you,
Yeah,
your response was
I
different.
had the opposite reaction. I just I remember in my undergraduate, which I did in Canada in Edmonton, my supervisor, who was British, was very keen that I write about India. So I ended up writing my BA thesis on sort of the Indian left, this writers' movement during partition. And I felt really uncomfortable. I felt like I was in this position of native informant, and it was really it sort of set me on a course for a very long time of saying I'm not going to do that again. So I ended up, doing the rest of my education sort of focusing on histories of transatlantic slavery, sort of thinking that my history is not that history, but as a racialized minority, I can tell this story in a certain way. But it's interesting because now I feel much more ready or inclined to take on working through some of these things. And I think actually, to be honest, like there's something that you said a little while ago that sort of made me think that a lot of it is my way back is through sound. You said this, how I had this desire to not play an entire track. I think it was King Tubby and Drexia and things like that. And then I realized that people really listen. People, it might seem a bit, you have this hosting anxiety, and I think there's something really insidious in a really powerful way about sound and how it enters your body like in this kind of unconscious way, and affects you. Like the piece that was I had it in the 2019 GIBCA biennial, used sort of infrasonics, which is kind of like lower registers of sound that kind of goes, you don't quite register them, but they affect your body. But I also know, like, I made this film about 6 years ago on fingerprinting, migrants' practice of fingerprinting. It's called A Rough History. And what I did is I asked 4 people to read a script, and I just had a microphone in the room and passed it around. And so the film, it's 16 mil, you can hear the room, you can hear the mic, and I think that became this moment of sort of understanding that there's different ways to start including yourself in the work, the kind of the time and space, and I think in a way doing that, and I also host a radio show, like these ways of sort of in a strange way, the media of sound has allowed me to sort of rethink making work more about where my family's from, which is India. So yeah, and I think there's something about sound that's there and that's not there that feels like an incredible trail of breadcrumbs for me to figure that out in a way that operates really different from the image.
I mean, in the lecture you've showed us, you have a kind of undertone of a very kind of haunting sound along the duration of the whole thing, I think. Where?
Mostly, yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes not, yeah.
And what's that sound? What?
Those are sounds recorded in outer space, actually, by NASA. So they've taken sort of data and they've converted them into sound files. So I think one of them is the sound of the sun, one of them is the sound of Saturn. And I mean, the sound is actually pretty crappy in this piece. Like there's feedback. You can hear the clock ticking in my plays. And so it never so the way I usually perform this is that you're in a room, it's dark, it's completely dark. It's like a black box. And all I have is one tiny light to read my script, and you just see the screen. You don't even see me. I don't light myself up. And And so you're sort of in the sound, you're in the image, however crappy. And then in this, with this kind of recording, I thought, well, what else can I do but make the room very audible and present? So the reason why it sounds probably like that there's only like that sounds playing throughout is because when it's not playing, you're hearing my room or you're hearing where I recorded the space, which I kind of quite like, and I feel like is kind of like an approach that I started when I made a rough history. It's just that there is something about that, the mistakes and the flaws that.
There was one point, I think, where you hear the wind kind of coming to your window, or maybe the rain. And I think, actually, I think that worked quite fittingly with, you were talking about the weather maybe at that point, and it kind of played along with you, which I thought worked quite well. But I was thinking about something. What was I thinking about? Oh, I lost my trail of thought. But I think, it was coming back to how we worked differently and maybe how we go through different phases. I'm now in the phase where I want to avoid working with myself, but also having had the same experience of being a kind of a spokesperson for Sri Lanka. And that's a very complicated situation, being Tamil, but diasporic Tamil, where I know that I've been included in biennials in Sri Lanka as one of few Tamils because of the kind of situation in Sri Lanka and what that does on a political level. And also thinking about how little I've represented Sweden, the place I'm from. And so my thinking at the moment is kind of working from Europe and going, okay, what's the trauma in Europe, and what's the stories that created this trauma in Europe? And so the storytelling, the kind of eugenics, the idea that I cannot be Swedish and still get questions about where I'm from, even though I am Swedish and how I have a white mother, but and a black father, but children who look white, and what that does in the present. So so I'm actually kind of now returning to, okay, what's Sweden's history, and what can be my history from Sweden, which includes the transatlantic slave trade, and includes St. Bartholomew, and includes hybridity that happened in St. Bart's that made its way into a Swedish narrative, but has been hidden, forgotten, erased, and there's kind of still a very homogeneous idea of Sweden. But what I like about your practice as well is how you weave together places around the world. So not just the two places that you talked about now, but also, so like in the piece in GIBCA, for example, of Jakarta and Gothenburg, and also St. Bart's. So there's kind of multiple places that are acting together at the same time. And I think that is interesting, because then you bring Europe into that mix. It wasn't just something that had happened elsewhere. It was kind of a weave around all these places, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that like that desire came very early on for me in my formation, was to sort of, you know, blast this illusion of modernity as being this sort of European phenomenon of the Industrial Revolution, because of course it was financed and fueled by transatlantic slavery and colonialism and indentureship. And that's where the massive profits came from that financed it, and the labor and all these sort of, these fantasies of like these pure laboring bodies that could just do the work all the time. Yeah, so to me, that's been really important. But it's interesting because I know the other thing we were talking about when we spoke before was about language, because I've been telling these really sort of long histories, sweeping histories, and actually the way this is written, which is very much an essay. I don't write like this anymore. I wrote this a few years ago, and because I also got really not suspicious, but I started questioning like what it means to have like a kind of narrative that has a, has all the words, all the tools of theory. And so like the distance between this piece that we've just watched together and the piece that I have at Clandestine are really written very differently, because I've been thinking a lot about, I mean, I don't want to sound like a wanker, but like just thinking about like poetry, I don't think I'm a good poet or anything like that, but I think that what that as a kind of epistemology does is sort of forces you to think of like language as being broken and fragmented. The page is like architectural, sculptural, and so you have to think about every aspect of it. And I think that also locates you, because I think, for example, like, I mean, I'm reading this text here, but anyone could have written it in a way. So I just like thinking about that, and like how language can sort of produce different ways of breathing, different kinds of silences, like when you read it aloud, and when you actually read it to yourself, it has all of these possibilities to sort of talk about these. I mean, yeah, talk about these wider histories, but then also located in something very specific.
Yeah. And what you do, I mean, what you do with language in for example, Radasteen in Two Ships, is kind of all these fragments in a way that are placed together, and you're using like mythology or gods, you're using um, the kind of the historical references to these different places and the similarities. You're using spices as a reference, and it kind of allows that space, I guess, as the bricolage, as kind of it's a bricolage with words of being somewhere in between all these systems or categorizations or tradings, or and kind of find a position within that, which I think is really, really interesting. And thinking about that kind of, I know you talk about the dialectical image, the Benjamin, or at least I don't know if you do it anymore, but you did when you were making this work. So what? How do you use that? Do you think of it as a strategy when you make work?
Well, I think I couldn't have made any of these works for Black Atlantis without having read Benjamin and been so influenced by him, because I think precisely what he does is brings different disparate things together, that and in that collision a sort of other meaning is formed. And I mean, the dialectical image, I think, has a more historically specific kind of connotation, which is that there's sort of these sort of images, like these sort of images that are sort of characteristic of a certain historical moment, and if you bring it into contrast with another such image, they sort of destabilize each other and produce something else. And I guess for me, like, I just felt like, I started Black Atlantis in 2014. And I think now, I mean, we all understand that there's ways in which we can draw a lot of links between the contemporary so-called crisis, migrant crisis, and transatlantic slavery. And there's amazing works that do that. So there's an amazing rich canon that sort of draws those lines. But at the time, when I was puzzling through it, I thought, oh, the only way I can do it is by sort of presenting Mediterranean migration as an afterlife of transatlantic slavery, which is not to say that there's a direct analogy or one leads to the other, one's a metaphor for another, because I think that smooths out the differences and actually does quite a lot of disservice to both histories, but to sort of put them in a kind of constellation together. And that enabled me to sort of present, like, as you probably saw, like that first lecture is just literally me presenting two things together and not really explaining why. And that's been really important for me. And I think it's sort of, you know, that was a PowerPoint talk, and then this is kind of a PowerPoint talk. And I think it's, I don't know if one's more evolved than the other, but this one that we just saw together is a lot more affect built into it, and but it's still sort of built on this idea of like, because I think I don't know how to think about that actually. Like, are there dialectical images in this? I think like this, the event itself is a sort of dialectical image. I'm not even doing that. It just is, you know, the way this boat, what happened to this boat. So all like what one could do is just try to witness it in some kind of ethical way, I guess, or try to at least.
And on the kind of role of the witness, I was thinking quite a lot about the water. So you used the water as a character in a way, as a protagonist, or as a background, and you have to give the words to that. But I sometimes I was wondering, is the water, are you also blaming the water? Like I was wondering where your position is with the water, like who, well, maybe not who, but what is the water in this? Is it, are we, is it just a witness? Is it culpable? Is it what? How do you want us to read the water? And also maybe how does it go in all the, because I haven't seen all the chapters, so I'm wondering if there's a kind of a thread of them. And I understand there's, in this piece there's quite a lot of reference to gods, maybe on different, or mythical or spiritual beings on different sides of the water, connecting the water, and also water gods like Mami
Water.
Mami, yeah. So it'd be really interesting to hear you kind of talk a bit about what the water does as a character.
Yeah, I mean, I think the water is an agent. It has agency. It's a character, you know, just like, you know, the people and the state, and even the boat. And I think the weather also. I think, you know, I think one of the things that is sort of lost in sort of Western sort of epistemology is a sense of like the agency and the animism of nature that exists in sort of so many sort of cultures. And so I don't know. I mean, is the weather? Is the sea culpable? Is it innocent? I mean, it's definitely there, and it's definitely doing things. It's doing different things at different times. I mean, when I was watching the video right now, it's a performance. The audio and the video were not synced up at all. So I don't know if that was just on my end. It could be that my computer's a bit too old and creaky. But what I meant to do was sort of, I was collecting different accounts of, like you said, different sort of deities and different figures of the sea, which I sort of see as a kind of very different kind of technique of crossing and making sense of the crossing. So I think the first one I start off is with Moko Jumbi, who is a figure in Trinidad, and it's this, but the figure itself is a kind of like amalgamation of a Nigerian deity and one that's from the Caribbean, and this idea of like walking across the ocean on stilts. I was like, oh, of course that's an account of crossing, you know, and the fact that the origin of Moko, and I think Moko and Jumbi are actually like, it's in the name. The amalgamation is in the name. So I can't remember what your second question was.
I can't remember it either. Where was that?
Oh, maybe that was both questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like about the what is the ocean? I mean, the ocean is sort of throughout the project. I mean, that's sort of the beginning and the end of it, and it just has different lives and different kinds of. But it's always a character, and it's always doing something. Yeah.
And then I'm like thinking about, I know we're running out of time for questions, but we spoke a bit about the speculative and the different temporalities, and I think that's super important in what you're doing, and really interesting. And for example, in this piece, you're referencing, or you're using a citation of this film Kempinski,
Yeah.
where they are kind of retelling a future imagination into the present, and so it'd be interesting to kind of hear you talk about a bit what that might do, like what to us. And I'm asking that on a really selfish kind of position, because how I'm thinking about how to work with kind of speculative histories, and how to narrate to change something, maybe to
Yeah, the speculative has been sort of in the project from the beginning. I sort of stumbled into Black Atlantis by hearing about Drexciya, this electronic band from the 90s that took like one of the most violent sort of aspects of crossing on a slave ship, which is the jettison of men and women overboard. And they sort of suggest in their liner notes and their track titles that unborn children adapted from living in amniotic fluid to seawater. So Black Atlantis started as a proposition of taking that quite literally, and then saying, okay, what if the future, the Afrofuturist future of that, was this current moment that we're in? And I think like Drexciya is very joyful. So I think it's not only resilience; it's kind of like a very joyful, celebratory resilience, like a lot of Afrofuturist work is. I think in this piece, the future has a sort of different sort of traction, I guess. Like for me, I don't think I chose to put that in any kind of rational way. I was just sort of feeling it out. But I think what's absolutely beautiful about Neil Belufa's film Kempinski is that it's such a simple turn, right? It's such a simple turn to narrate the futures if it's in the present, and it changes both the present and the future. It changes the possibility. It does something to us who witness it. I don't know what it does to the people who are in the film, but to sort of see it, it sort of, I think, engenders a sense of possibility, and through that possibility, a kind of recursive way of looking at the present and being able to see the present and all of its problems more clearly. So I think for me, there was, I don't know, I think that's what fictioning does, which I think is really powerful, which is by kind of going slightly, by these kind of making uncanny, you actually are able to hit something on the head more precisely. So I think his film does that so beautifully. It's such a deceptively simple film.
Yeah, but I've only seen it as a reference in your work, but I haven't. But I would like to see it.
I found it's online. I think at least it was when I made this piece.
I'm not sure if we should continue, or if we should open for questions. Ioana, do you want to? Because I'm kind of aware of the time.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. I would say that maybe we should open for questions, and if other participants would also like to switch on their cameras, I think it would be great to actually have a conversation, all of us. And thank you both so much, really.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you. Ioana, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Oh, here's.
I was wondering if there are any questions, or if we should just continue the conversation, because of course I would have tons of questions, but I feel that I also have the chance to talk with both of you in private. So I'm just extremely happy to hear you both talking about your practices. And of course, I would definitely like to know more, Nina, about your intentions with working with the story of St. Bart's and Franska Tomten, because I have to admit that when we first met, you were already organizing speculative workshops in connection to this, together with students. And yeah, so if you want to tell us a bit more, I would be really grateful. But I also switch off my camera if everybody else is a bit shy.
Sweden is always a little bit shy. I'm probably not very different, but yeah. So the work with St. Bart started very much from looking at how I'm thinking about it, from how I was talking about why do I always talk about otherness or difference from my father's perspective, or kind of the view of having a non-white father. Why don't I delve into where Sweden is connected? What's Sweden's history that I'm inheriting in this story? And so St. Bart's, a few years ago, there was this painting in the newspaper, and I didn't know about the history of St. Bart's before, and so it kind of struck me as this history that hadn't been spoken about in schools or in history. And I was curious to see, because I'm working with hybridity and this position in being in between two categories, or two people who've been labeled as two different categories, and how Sweden narrate their identity as being white, as being quite homogenous. And so I want to kind of disturb that image by saying, actually, that's not true. My father was black, but my children are white, whatever that might mean. Therefore, how do we know our heritage? How do we know who's actually white and who's not? And so trying to think about a not white homogeneous population that therefore need to delve into this history together. It's not the non-white person's problem only to try and figure this problem out. And so St. Bart's then became one of these places. I mean, there's other places that Sweden have colonial histories with, one of them being the Gold Coast, the other one being in the northern Americas, but also obviously the closest is it's northern Sweden, the Sápmi. And I have in the past tried to make a work about Sápmi because I was always really fascinated about Sápmi history growing up in Sweden, and also that didn't come up in my history books. But when I was in Sápmi and made this massive trip around and took so much film, I had this kind of realization that my history is very different from Sápmi history, and I cannot tell that history, and I cannot represent again like that position. I have to start from my position, and that's from the mixed, and not having a community in Sweden, not having kind of, I don't have a Sri Lankan community in Sweden, for example. I don't have, which there are examples of in Sápmi. So yeah, so St. Bart's becomes like a case study for looking at how hybridity was happened, and how law maybe was shaped. So, for example, there were slaves, they were Europeans, and they were free coloreds, and the free coloreds were a mix between slaves and Europeans. And the law for free coloreds was different from slaves and white Europeans, but it was closer to that of the slaves than the whites. And in making this law, Sweden was asking for advice, for example, from the other neighboring Caribbean islands of how to make this law. So just even thinking about how you make subjects further away from your own identity, how do you kind of start that process of like who is, how do we keep this otherness, or this the slave for the European further away from our own being, which is a structure that I think is still in play in present Sweden. And kind of for example, in my own practice, I talk about what happens in the personal family. So how just a few days ago I was asked by a woman if I was the mother of my child and who's blonde and blue-eyed, and then she said, "Oh, she has her father's eyes," and I said, "No, actually, it's my mother's eyes." And so that kind of conversation of not thinking that that can happen, like it's a yeah. So that's what I'm working on. How is a bigger kind of question, how you do it, but so looking at the photography archives that exist in France and some digitized in Sweden, there's obviously not very much to be found. There's traces, and then using the speculative to kind of create narratives that could have happened. That's kind of an explanation of that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nena. We also received a question from a member of the audience that asks, what position did you take when you were telling these stories? Would you call yourself a visitor, a collector, a passerby? Is it constant or does it shift? And this is a question to Ayesha in terms of an insider-outsider dynamic.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. No,
I'll also send the question in the chat so you have it.
I mean, I definitely see myself very much as an outsider. I definitely don't share the history of the experience of people who are in these predicaments or have these histories. So I'm very much a visitor to. I mean, I definitely hope I'm not a collector, because collecting seems like a bit violent, like extractive. I try, I guess, to be a witness that calls attention to my own practice of witnessing. So, for example, telling this story, for me, it was really important to be in the room and tell the story, and to also write a little bit about myself, but not like, turn it into some kind of histrionic thing. And in other chapters of this project, I'm in it much more, and sort of talking. It's almost a little bit like field work, where I talk about conversations that I've had with people or things that I've learned, and I'm not presenting it as academic knowledge. It'll be like someone tells me something at a bar, and then I go home and look it up on the internet, and then that's what I talk about, for example. So I definitely feel like a visitor is probably the best out of the terms that you suggested. Not a collector, and hopefully not a passerby, because that seems a little too. Yeah, I'm trying to sort of pause and sort of be present, and also not turn that into a moment of over-identification or telling any of these stories like they're mine.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if we have more questions from the audience, either on the chat or just directly.
Yeah, please.
So I don't have this ghostly position where I come in and out of the room.
Yes, please ask directly. We're here. Our group is small.
I have a question. I'm just wondering, because you were saying that this started in 2014 and how you've moved on, and I'm wondering, what are you working on, or what, like maybe in Helsinki, or planning on working on? Or you're
Okay, yeah, I keep doing that. Well, I've started a new project. Sort of, I realized I've already started it in retrospect, and it's called Brown Atlantis, and it's to sort of think about the Indian Ocean with the same kind of methodology that I've used in Black Atlantis, but thinking about histories of indenture, intertwined with histories of slavery, but also ecologies. What's really interesting about Indian Ocean history is it's very different and much more complex. There's quite a, because of the trade winds, because of the monsoons, boats have been crossing the Indian Ocean for millennia. And so there's quite a lot of south-south conversation as opposed to like the north-south that's characteristic of the transatlantic slave trade. So I sort of see this piece I made for GIBCA as a sort of part of that. It's also, I made a piece called I Sing of the Sea, a Mermaid of the Trees for the Liverpool Biennial, which was about the first undersea cable between Britain and India. And yeah, I think I might have mentioned earlier, I started a radio show called Radio Brown Atlantis, where I just have this proposition, which is what I just told you. And I just send it to different people and just say, well, I don't want to talk about your art practice. Let's just talk about this idea. And if you want to bring some songs or bring some texts or anything, and we just sort of jam for an hour. And to me, like, I guess that's kind of like this continuation of sort of thinking of sonic exploration. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know if that's the same for you, but I feel like I only realize I'm onto a new project once I've already started it a little while before. So I'm already sort of doing it for like a year or two. Well, it looks like Shin has a question. Hi, Shin.
Hi. Thank you so much. This was super interesting. I have a question for Ayesha, and I just wanted to actually a little bit follow up from the previous question. And I was real interested in the aspect of the kind of visual and the sonic, like their dynamic and the relation in the video. Because what I started thinking was that, because I was really inspired by Christina Sharp's work, where she also writes a lot about the weather. And she writes about weather as the kind of, what she calls the climate, which is anti-Black. So it's in itself it's kind of all-encompassing, which does not, of course, exclude the possibilities for change, but still it's in itself kind of all-encompassing climate that folds all of us. So there's a radical complicity, but also intimacy that's very violent. And when I was like watching the video and hearing you talking about the aspect of vision and sound, there's a moment where it said like sound has this quality that it just, I don't know if I captured the word right, but something said like it just, affects us. It kind of gets us in a different way than when we see things. And then start thinking about like also the discussions in sound studies where in some cases sound has been more associated with affect that has a kind of transformative potential vis-a-vis the kind of violence of the visual captures or images. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how you see, because there was a moment you said like it didn't sync, like the video and the sound didn't sync. And I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about what you envision as, or how you thought about the kind of dynamic between these two registers, and also the way in which you were breathing. And I really love that you said, how words change the way we breathe. And I was also thinking about the comment by Nina about how when you hear the wind, that also changed. So there's like very kind of ecological sounding or sound ecology by itself. So I was just wondering, like, sorry, I'm trying to capture different pieces together. But I was just thinking that there is something here about the dynamic between the kind of two registers, the sense of radical complicity, but also violent intimacy, as well as the perhaps question of ethics, like what is our ethical relation, because I think the question about being a visitor, so there's a sense of complicity in it, because it's not simply you said, I don't want to be a passerby, which is kind of more, I guess, passive and not taking responsibility. And you said, I don't want to be a collector because that's more violence. So I was just trying to see whether there's also a possibility of teasing out the kind of ethical gestures that can be also manifesting then between the visual and the sonic. So
wow, I don't know where to start, but let me try. Yeah, I think, and it's kind of pretty wild because I wrote this piece just as In the Wake came out, so I hadn't read In the Wake, which I mean, if I had, I would have gotten to where I had much quicker, because she delineates the weather so with such clarity. I guess what I was thinking about was, yeah, I think, as I was saying to Nina, that it's just a character with all the kind of, I guess for me, the culprit, the culpable is the state, is empire, are these sort of this greed that hides itself behind laws, and the way, say, privateering normalizes a certain kind of piracy, the way indenture, tries to do the work of slavery, et cetera, et cetera. I think so. For me, the weather is just like, it's kind of like a force. That's why I think Mami Wata as a figure actually kind of encompasses it, because depending on, like, Mami Wata as a figure that exists sort of all over the sort of western coast of, well, actually throughout the continent of Africa, not just the west coast of Africa, and then the eastern seaboard of South America and the Caribbean. So, and sometimes she's very benign, and sometimes she's extremely violent, and so part of what I was trying to do is sort of highlight some of those. Like, sometimes she pulls you underwater and she'll lure you, sometimes she'll look after you, but I guess that's just how the ocean is. About the image, well, yeah, I mean, like, I honestly don't know if you saw the same video I saw. Like, there was literally about a 5 or 6 second gap between where the image and sound were meant to be. And to me, that was fine, because I think it also makes palpable the distance that we're in. Like, it's also sort of saying, here's this video that won't work properly because we're on Zoom, and we have differential video connections and different speeds of computers, and so I just thought, okay, that's fine. But there's certain ways in which, like, for me, for example, whenever you're hearing stories of deities that Mary Ellen is reading out, the screen is either supposed to be black or white. When I saw it, there'd be a little bit of moving image, and then it would cut to white and then to black. And for me, it was really important to sort of clear the stage to hear her. And actually, if you hear the original recording, so Mary Ellen recorded it in Dakar, and the original recording, you can actually hear some birds singing, and you can hear, like, and to me that's really great, but it probably doesn't transmit on the internet. So to me, that sonic information is, I think, yeah, we anything that's like recorded, like, conveys more information than we know. Like, if you take a photograph, like, you'll be like, oh, look, there's a little bit of my foot in the corner, or and you won't notice it if you're looking around, but you'll notice it in a photo. And the same with sound, like, certain things are not meant to be in the frame are there. For me, I find, and maybe this is just for any practitioner who's working in a different medium, I think you gain a kind of relationship to your medium, and then you go to another medium, and it's like, there's so much possibility because you're just suddenly in this other zone. And, like, I don't know if sound has this greater possibility than the image does, but for me, moving from image to sound was completely exciting, because not exciting, but really generative, because it, like you said, it interpolates the body, it enervates it, as Benjamin would say, it in these ways that you don't register consciously, and it's not just what you hear; it's the frequencies, things like that. I mean, it's kind of amazing. Like, if you mix sound for a film, usually you're working with dozens of tracks at the same time, and if you hear it, you won't know that that's what you're hearing. It's like so many bits of information, but there is this kind of richness that if you layered an image like that many times, it might be more obvious. I'm guessing, but yeah, I think that, I don't know, I think if you're making a film, like, one of the things you do is you record several minutes of silence, and that's called room tone. And that's because you won't even notice that each room, each space has a specific time. I mean, it's like that with smells too, right? Like your office might have this specific smell, your friend's house might, and you don't even know what it is until you go back there like years later and you're like, oh yeah, that's that smell. So I think and so working with this piece in GIBCA, so the pieces are actually dyed, which is quite a learning process. Working with textiles is also really interesting because it's very laborious. It's a lot of work, but they're dyed in cinnamon, cocoa, turmeric, coffee. So when you walk into the room, and two of the fabrics, textiles are like 4 meters high. Were left in the Thames for like 3 days. So they smell really crappy. Like they smell like very, like they're in polluted waters for a long time. So you have all these smells when you walk in, and it's such a strange thing that we also don't notice. Yeah. So I don't know if I've answered all you, because you asked a lot of great questions, and I don't know if I answered them all.
Thank you, that was great. We can always chat more later.
Yeah, sure. In outer space. I think we have 5 more minutes, don't we? So if someone wants to ask any final questions. Should we call it?
What do you think, Ioana? Should we?
I'd say that if there aren't more questions, we would like to thank you both for tonight, and thank you all for joining us.